Have you ever sensed, deep down, that someone in this world is invisibly linked to your soul, even if you haven't met them yet? Like a part of you quietly knows a love exists somewhere, patiently awaiting its moment to blossom. Perhaps you've wondered why your past attempts ended in disappointment. Maybe you've begun to think you are the problem. But what if I told you that these failures, this silence, even the frustration, were subtle signals of something greater being built within you, something that transcends romantic love, something tied to the awakening of your soul? Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist who dedicated his life to exploring the mysteries of the human unconscious, believed that true love, the kind that transforms, heals, and gives meaning, isn't random. It reflects a profound, inner, almost sacred process. According to Jung, the love meant for you can only emerge when you are on the right path within yourself. This video is a map to help you understand if you are on that path. Here, you'll discover 4 distinct, emotional, even spiritual signs that you're approaching your true encounter, not just with any soul, but with the one that mirrors the essence of your being. The goal isn't to rush meetings or create fantasies, but to show you that as you blossom from within, the right love blossoms outward. And perhaps, by the end of this video, you'll realize that the love you've always sought has been seeking you too. But before acknowledging that, it's necessary to understand what's happening inside, because no one can find true love until they find themselves. And that's where it all begins. How many times have you fallen for someone, only to wonder later, what did I even see in that person? How often have you mistaken a need for love for a genuine connection? How often have you felt you were loving when you were actually just trying to find yourself in another? The truth is, most people fall in love not with who someone truly is, but with what that person represents to their subconscious. Jung called these projections. We project onto others what is suppressed, lost, or underdeveloped within ourselves. This is why we often feel an immediate attraction to someone, without knowing why. The soul recognizes something, but that something isn't always true. Sometimes, it's just a mirror. Have you ever felt that someone touched you in an almost irrational way? That one glance, one gesture, was enough to overwhelm you with a sense of connection? Jung warned us that the unconscious has its own intelligence. It stores traces of everything we experience, dream of, avoid, and desire. When someone activates one of these hidden elements, we call it love. But is it really? You may have experienced this already, falling for someone who seemed to be everything you were looking for, but over time, the image starts to crumble. You notice inconsistencies, feel disappointed, suffer, and then the sensation arises that you have been deceived, even though it was your own unconscious that led you there, not to cause pain, but to reveal something to you. That's the crux of it. The love meant for you doesn't arrive to fill a void, but to overflow what is already whole. And to achieve this, you must first become whole yourself. So, the first sign that you are on the right path to meeting true love has nothing to do with dating. It's connected to solitude. It's when you start to feel content in your own company, not because you've given up on love, but because you understand that it cannot come from a place of lack. When you prefer your own peace to the presence of someone who throws you off balance, something quietly shifts. You're no longer seeking another to escape from yourself, but preparing internally to walk alongside someone without ceasing to walk within yourself. At this stage, your choices change. You no longer tolerate what you once did. You don't idealize what you once did. You don't romanticize absence, silence, coldness, because you've learned to warm yourself with your own presence. And it's at this moment that the universe begins to act differently, as if it is saying, now yes, you're ready. But of course, this isn't always easy. Sometimes being alone can hurt, especially when we look around and see others living seemingly perfect lives. And that's when the second sign appears. You begin to understand that your journey doesn't need to be compared to anyone else's, because for the first time, you feel guided by an internal clock. You stop chasing approval, proving you're good enough, seeking validation in empty gazes, and start trusting. Trusting yourself, trusting the timing, trusting that what belongs to you will find you. At this moment, something unusual occurs. Your energy changes. Without realizing it, you start attracting different people, people who come not to take, but to give, people who love you, not for what you show, but for who you truly are. This leads us to the third sign. You begin to see yourself with different eyes, not as someone needy, rejected, or broken, but as someone who is healing, who is learning to love not from a place of lack, but by their own choice. And this new perspective changes everything, because the love meant for you isn't revealed to those who hide. It only manifests when you decide to see your true self with light, shadow, fear, and courage. And here the fourth sign appears, almost always subtly. Life begins to test you. It throws you into situations similar to the past. An ex-partner reappears, a temptation disguised as an opportunity, an emptiness you want to fill with old distractions. But this time you choose differently, because you're no longer seeking just any love. You're waiting for someone who recognizes your soul, not for what you offer, but for who you are. And perhaps, going through this stage, you'll understand the most important thing. The love meant for you isn't perfect. It's conscious. It's not completion, but reflection. It's not need, but overflow. Carl Jung said that the meeting of two souls who recognize each other is, above all, an opportunity for inner transformation. You don't meet this person by chance. They appear when you are ready to see in yourself what you previously projected onto another. They don't come to save you, but to walk with you as you save yourself, every day. And then, when you least expect it, you'll look into someone's eyes and realize you're no longer searching for love, because love is already there, not only between you, but within each of you. And that changes everything. But how do you truly know that you're on this path? How do you distinguish true love from a disguised need? The answer is closer than you think. We'll see you in the next part. And what comes next might forever change your perceptions of love. There's a quiet scene that repeats itself in the lives of many people, especially between the ages of 30 and 65. Someone comes home after a long day, slowly closes the door, drops their bag or briefcase off their shoulder, and for a few seconds just stands there, staring into the emptiness. Their phone might be in their hand, but there's no one to text. The house is silent, and so is their heart, but not in a good way, in a waiting way, a waiting they can't name, an absence they can't explain. They've had stories, some memorable, others confusing. They've already given themselves away, already retreated, already cried inside. They've already thought they'd found true love, and then discovered it was just an illusion, another desperate attempt to feel loved. And deep down, even after all these years, they ask themselves, will I ever see true love? Or did I miss it somewhere along the way without noticing? It's at this moment in life that many people begin to feel something unusual, a light anxiety mixed with clarity, as if a part of them knows that if they keep repeating the same patterns, the same feelings, nothing will change. But they also don't know exactly what they need to do differently. That's when the soul begins to speak, not shouting, but whispering. Carl Jung said that before finding true love outside, you need to reconcile with the internal fragments that are at war. And for that, self-knowledge is no longer a choice, but a call. Have you noticed how some stories repeat themselves, even with different people? A woman who always attracts emotionally unavailable men. A man who always falls for women who need to be saved. Someone who constantly gives themselves completely, only to feel empty, used, and forgotten. It seems like an external pattern, but it's actually an internal dynamic. It's your subconscious trying to resolve, through another person, what can only be healed inside yourself. Jung explained this as the repetition of unresolved complexes, old wounds, some from childhood, others inherited from ancestors, continue to influence your emotional choices, even if you don't realize it. Maybe you've learned that love is synonymous with effort, or that affection only comes after pain. Perhaps you grew up hearing that you need to be strong, and that became a shield, distancing you from true connections. Maybe you learned to silence your needs to maintain harmony. And today, you don't know how to ask for what you need, let alone how to receive it. So, you walk through life seemingly whole, but broken inside. And each new relationship is a hope, a chance to finally feel complete. But when the person leaves, or when you leave, the emptiness returns. It's not bad luck. It's not cruel fate. It's an invisible cycle of the unconscious trying to complete itself through you. And here's the most important thing. Until you reunite with what is wounded, with what was lost in the past, you'll keep searching in others for what can only be found within yourself. In this lies the beauty and the pain of the path to destined love. It requires you to see yourself emotionally naked, to confront your shadows, to acknowledge that you too have been a villain in some stories, to recognize your repetitions not as guilt, but as a key, because when you understand your pattern, it stops controlling you. A woman who has spent her life adapting too much to others might suddenly decide to say what she thinks, even if it scares her. Someone who has always run from their emotions might allow themselves to cry while listening to an old song, sitting alone in their car. Someone who has learned to survive in silence might finally shout inside themselves, "I deserve more." These moments are invisible to the world, but for the soul, they are revolutions. And that's what brings you closer to the love that transforms. Not the desperate search for someone special, but the quiet courage to become a whole person. Jung said that true encounters happen when the other person sees in you not lack, but presence, a wholeness that pulsates, a radiance that comes not from perfection, but from awareness. So, if today you feel you've become more selective, if you're no longer satisfied with crumbs, if you prefer your own company to a presence that diminishes you, know that it's not loneliness. It's emotional maturity. It's your soul clearing the way for the arrival of true love. Not to complete you, but to find you already whole. But of course, there are days when everything seems to have been thrown backward. You think you're evolving, and suddenly an emotional trigger knocks you down. The pain of an old breakup returns. The absence of someone you don't even want anymore tightens your chest. You ask yourself, have I regressed? The answer? No. Emotional growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You return to the same wounds, but with a new perspective. Now, you feel consciously. Now you suffer without losing yourself. Now you don't run. You face the challenges. And it's in that confrontation that you transform. Maybe you haven't found your love yet, but if you've reached this point, if you're reflecting, searching, crying with dignity, and rising from the ground with truth, then yes, you're on the right path. Because love doesn't appear as if by magic. It is born in those who are ready for it, in those who have purified themselves, in those who look at themselves honestly. And for that, it's necessary to have tools, support, that helps illuminate the path within you. So, if you're on this path of internal reunification and want to apply Jung's teachings to your practical life with ease, consistency, and truth, I invite you to check out the ebook, The Jung Method LUD, 5 minutes a day for inner peace and clarity of mind. This method is a simple but powerful step that will help you get closer to your essence, work on your projections, and strengthen your emotional presence day by day. The link to access it is in the pinned comment on this video, because sometimes what separates you from the love you so desire isn't another person, it's yourself, and it's when you rediscover yourself that true love finds its way to you. Have you ever wondered why some connections are so strong that it feels as if you've known that person all your life? This isn't an exaggeration or romanticization. It's a real, almost physical sensation. A gaze meets another, as if recognizing something familiar. A gesture awakens memories you didn't have. Simple words resonate like revelations. The question is, where does this come from? Carl Jung provided a provocative and perhaps uncomfortable answer. In his view, these stunning encounters aren't coincidences. They're invitations from the subconscious, ways in which your psyche attempts to evolve through another person. Love, in this context, isn't a reward. It's a mirror, a catalyst, a portal. What if we told you that many of those you've fallen in love with, including those who hurt you, were actually symbolic manifestations of parts of yourself that you haven't yet integrated? At first glance, this idea may seem absurd, but look back. Remember the love that left, the one that broke you. Now ask yourself honestly, what did that person make you see in yourself? What old pain did they awaken? What behavior of yours did they reveal, even without intending to? Jung argued that we project onto others not only what we admire, but also what we suppress. And when these projections clash with the reality of the other person, conflict arises, and often disappointment. Because deep down, you're interacting not only with the person, you're interacting with what they represent in your psyche. Have you ever experienced that? Loving the idea of a person, not the person themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes your story can open the eyes of someone who is going through the same thing right now. But why do we do this? Why do we insist on repeating the same patterns? The answer lies in the invisible structure of our soul, the archetypes. Jung called archetypes primal forms, universal patterns that live in our collective unconscious. These are symbolic images that are passed down from generation to generation. The hero, the mother, the wise man, the lover, the traitor, the child, the old man. And each of us carries these images in unique and deeply personal versions. When someone appears and activates one of these archetypes, especially the lover or the savior, the emotional force is so great that it seems like magic. But it's biographical. Behind that attraction lies your whole story. That's why we sometimes feel drawn to people who are completely not our type, as if something inside is screaming, "It's them," even if everything rational says otherwise. Jung explained that this happens when another person embodies, even unconsciously, the anima or animus, the archetypal image of the inner feminine or masculine principle. Imagine a man who had a controlling mother, but who was also sweet and idealized. He might spend his life falling for women who simultaneously embody that sweetness and dominance, because his anima is shaped by that template. Now imagine a woman who grew up with a father who was absent, but whom she idealized as a noble, detached, and mysterious man. She might constantly seek cold and unattainable men, not because she likes it, but because her animus is marked by that absence. These dynamics aren't conscious. They're shadows acting behind the scenes of the personality. And as long as they remain unrecognized, they continue to repeat themselves. How many times have you said, "Why does this always happen to me?" Perhaps because there's something in you that has yet to be revealed. And when the subconscious wants to teach you something, it sends a person, a story, a situation that at first seems enchanting and then turns into an emotional earthquake. But not every earthquake brings destruction. Some come to show what is built incorrectly. The problem is that in most cases we resist the lesson. Pain scares, loss hurts, rejection wounds. But if you look closely, you'll notice that every love that shook you deeply also pushed you forward. And that immersion, however painful, is the path to true transformation. That's why Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. But not every transformation is visible. Sometimes it happens quietly. For example, when you realize that you can no longer humiliate yourself to please, or when you realize that you no longer want to romanticize crumbs, or when you feel that you prefer the discomfort of truth to the illusion of almost love. These are clear signs that something has changed in you, that even without realizing it, you stop seeking love as salvation and start seeing it as a path. Now, answer me in the comments. Which love has changed you the most? The one that left, but left you something new. Don't hesitate to share. Sometimes our pain, told truthfully, can become a light for someone who is still in the dark. Returning to Jung's point of view, the biggest risk of projection is enchantment. It's when you confuse intensity with truth. It's when you think that love is what you feel at the peak of euphoria, when in reality it can only be tested in the tranquility of shared life. Jung said that love is a process of individuation. The other person appears as a mirror, as a challenge, as a provocation, but also as a bridge between who you are and who you can become. True love doesn't come to change you. It invites you to unfold. And in that lies the rarest beauty, when two people meet, not to complete each other, but to expand their horizons. But be careful. Not every intense connection is destiny. Some are just encounters with old wounds. You feel the same butterflies in your stomach, the same fire, the same dizziness. But when you look closely, you realize it's just another repetition disguised as novelty. How to tell the difference? Empty intensity throws you off balance. Conscious intensity deepens you. Love that repeats the past holds you back. Love that reveals the present liberates you. And sometimes, to understand this, you need to stop seeking answers. You need to silence, observe, listen to what your body feels near someone. Pay attention to whether you shrink or relax, whether you adapt or express yourself, whether you fade or light up. The body doesn't lie, neither does the soul, but the ego lies constantly. It wants security, approval, confirmation. It wants to repeat what it knows, even if it's destructive, because the ego hates emptiness, and it's in that emptiness that true love is born. Perhaps that's why, when you start to heal, encounters become rarer, not because you're missing opportunities, but because you stop confusing presences with distractions. You no longer fall in love with what shines. You fall in love with what has roots, with what has silence, with what has truth. And that choice, made by a conscious heart, opens the space for a love that truly transforms, the one that comes not with screams, but with whispers, a love that doesn't promise the sky, but walks with you on the earth, a love that doesn't deceive, but reveals. Are you ready for that kind of love? Or are you still seeking in another what you lack? Leave in the comments what touched you the most. Your reflections might be what someone wanted to read today, because love, even when it hasn't arrived yet, begins when you decide to find it. Harvard University conducted a study involving over 700 people over 80 years. The goal, to find out what truly makes life fulfilling. What they found surprised even the most skeptical researchers. It's not money, success, or fame. The number one factor for a happy and meaningful life was deep and healthy relationships. But the most curious thing in all of this is that among the participants, the happiest weren't those who found love early, but those who learned, often late, to know themselves, recognize their patterns, and only then consciously choose with whom they truly wanted to share their life. This information already destroys one of the most deeply rooted myths we carry within us. The idea that love should happen quickly, early, with overwhelming force, as if time were our enemy. In reality, time is what prepares us to recognize the depth of a true connection. Jung already said that what doesn't reach the surface of consciousness returns in the form of destiny. That is, until we make our unconscious patterns visible, we will repeat the same mistakes and call it bad luck. Have you ever noticed this in your life? That feeling that you are always connecting with the same type of people, even if they have different names, faces, and stories? It's not a coincidence. It's an emotional pattern, often formed in childhood, when you quietly and painfully understood that to be loved, you had to be useful, submissive, always available, always strong, or always perfect. And then you grow up, and you believe you're making free choices, when in reality you're obeying commands whose existence you don't even suspect. Let's consider an example. Imagine a 52-year-old woman who has been through 2 marriages and several significant relationships. She believes she's unlucky in love, that she attracts men who aren't ready for serious relationships. But in a deep conversation with a friend, she admits that she grew up with an emotionally unstable and detached father. And without realizing it, she began to associate love with waiting, with uncertainty, with absence, because that was the pain she knew as love. Such awareness isn't easy. It causes conflict, it hurts, but it also liberates, because when you start to understand that your subconscious is choosing for you, you can finally take the reins of your life into your own hands. And now the question arises, how many of your love relationships were truly conscious choices, and how many were repetitions of old wounds? Think calmly. Remember your relationships. What did you tolerate? What did you accept in the name of love? What did you consider normal, even though deep down you knew it wasn't? Carl Jung wrote that what scares people the most isn't suffering, but self-knowledge. Because truly knowing yourself means giving up the illusions you've clung to your whole life. That's why many intense relationships end dramatically, because they were built not on reality, but on layers of projections, fantasies, and lack. In the beginning, everything seems magical. Conversations flow, gazes connect, creating the feeling that destiny has finally smiled upon you. But then, small inconsistencies appear, contradictions, painful pauses. The real person begins to show, and they don't match the image you created. And then, instead of accepting reality, many prefer to deny, run, blame, because they haven't learned to love the other as they are. They've learned to love what they represent. This is one of the greatest emotional tragedies of adult life, confusing presence with function, confusing the real person with a part of our internal script. But there is an even more alarming fact. According to the American Psychological Association, over 60% of relationships end not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of self-knowledge. What does this mean? That love existed, but the unrecognized shadows of each person, the fear of being abandoned, unhealed jealousy, the need for control, insecurity masquerading as independence, suffocated the connection until it broke. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that something beautiful died inside you, not because of a lack of feelings, but because of an excess of emotional baggage? Perhaps it's time to share this in the comments, not just as an outpouring of emotions, but as a way to reveal your story and allow it to heal others. Sometimes your phrase can be the mirror someone needs to see their life. Returning to the Jungian journey, it's important to understand that destined love isn't perfect. It's not always calm. It's non-linear. Above all, it requires two people to be willing to see each other beyond their projections. This is possible only when both have already traveled part of the path in solitude. That's why the silence in your personal life right now might be a sign of preparation, not rejection, because sometimes the soul needs solitude to unlearn what wasn't love, to cleanse itself of the voices that said, "You have to be with someone to be happy." And only after that does it open honestly, fully, for an encounter that truly matters. Many people ask, how do you know if it's true love? The answer is less romantic than it seems. You know it's true love when you don't need to stop being yourself for it to work, when you don't need to belong to someone else, hide, or force yourself to do something, when the connection uplifts you, expands you, encourages you to grow, not just survive. And you know what the most curious thing is? True encounters don't come to soothe loneliness. They come when you've already learned to live with it, when you no longer need another, but want to share with them what you've already built inside yourself. This is a major turning point, because as long as you seek in another a solution to your pain, you will attract problematic, unstable, exhausting relationships. But when you decide to look inside yourself and accept your pain without rushing, without running, without masks, you change your frequency, your energy, your emotional field, and that changes everything. Jung argued that the shadow, all that we reject in ourselves, is one of the main elements we project onto others. That's why sometimes you feel an instant antipathy towards someone for no logical reason, or feel an almost uncontrollable attraction, even knowing that it will hurt you. The shadow recognizes the shadow. The light recognizes the light. And until you integrate them both, you will continue to oscillate between extremes. It's not about avoiding contrasts or becoming a cold and calculating person. Quite the opposite. It's about living love more consciously, more present, more authentically, about knowing when to surrender and when to retreat, about distinguishing love from emotional dependence, about learning that true connection is born when the other person stops being a promise and becomes a presence. And this sometimes takes time. It's painful, it's disappointing, but it's worth it, because mature love is a rare achievement. It's the connection of two internal worlds, whole, who decide to share their shadows and light without trying to save, heal, or dominate. If you've reached this place in the video, you probably belong to a small but growing group of people who no longer want superficial relationships, who are tired of pretending that everything is okay when it's not, who prefer a painful truth to a comfortable lie. And perhaps what unites us most here is precisely this, the desire to live a love that has soul, purpose, and depth, a love that looks you in the eyes and says, "I see who you are, and I choose to walk with you despite it." If you also believe in this, write in the comments what true love means to you. Your opinion may touch someone who is still trying to understand their feelings, because after all, we all learn to love. But only those who consciously choose to learn will one day be able to experience a love that doesn't bind, doesn't save, doesn't hurt, but simply transforms. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the perfect love. Others lose it because they weren't ready when it appeared. But there's a third group, smaller, quieter, almost invisible, who decide to become that person even before meeting someone. Not out of lack, not out of despair, but out of awareness, because they finally understand that true love doesn't arise between two halves that complete each other. It's born between two wholes that choose each other. Have you ever felt that your own presence has become more reliable than any uncertain company? This isn't selfishness, it's evolution. It's a clear sign that you're leaving emotional childhood, that place where love means salvation, promise, or filling, and entering emotional maturity, where love means a real encounter, a mutual choice, and shared growth. Most love stories that collapse don't end because of a lack of feelings. They collapse because they were built on fragile projections, repetitive patterns, and unvoiced silences, like a house of cards that collapses at the first breath of reality. How many times have you felt that you'd almost reached the goal, that now everything would be okay, and suddenly everything is lost for no apparent reason. We often believe that the problem is the other person, or worse, that the problem is in ourselves. But what if what ended wasn't love, but the unconscious scripts that you were trying to play out with each other? Jung would call this the collective unconscious being in conflict with the process of individuation. In other words, the soul is trying to grow, and the mind insists on repeating the past. Here, we need to pause and ask the question that torments many. How do you know if it's love or projection? The answer, although simple, requires courage. When it's love, you feel more yourself near that person. When it's projection, you feel anxiety, a sense of duty, trying to maintain an image that doesn't match your reality. True love gives you space to breathe, make mistakes, and grow. Projection demands performance. If you need to change to be accepted, you're probably not being loved. You're being idealized. And what's even worse, idealization comes at a high price, because one day you get tired. One day you look in the mirror and realize that the version of you that the other person loves isn't you. And when that moment comes, two things can happen. Either you shrink even more to fit into someone else's love, or you rise, even if it hurts, to regain your self-respect. The second path is complex, but necessary. It's when you stop asking for crumbs and start hosting internal feasts. It's when you understand that love that hurts isn't love, but attachment in disguise, emotional dependence with a beautiful name. And it's at this moment that everything starts to make sense. All the previous pain, all the breakups, all the silences, all the emptiness, it wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. It was emotional training, so that when true love appears, you're ready not to run, not to sabotage, and not to settle for less than you deserve. Many ask, but what if I've already lost that love? What if I had it and missed it? You never lose what truly belongs to you. What left had to leave, because there were still parts of you that weren't ready, parts that had to mature, cry, find themselves. Time is wrong. Love isn't wrong. What's wrong is our ability to trust the process. Jung said that suffering is the most effective way to expand consciousness. And it's true, because only after falling do we begin to doubt the ground we walk on. Only after grief do we appreciate presence. Only after pain do we understand on an intuitive level what it truly means to love. Not with the expectation that the other will save us, but with humility and tenderness, like two evolving beings. Have you noticed how some loves, even short-lived, leave a deep mark, as if they are milestones pointing to forgotten parts of yourself? This happens because sometimes a person enters your life not to stay, but to reveal something, to trigger a process, to push you towards your most authentic self. And that's not failure, it's a beginning. But there comes a moment when you no longer want to learn from pain. You want to learn from clarity, from presence, from care. And it's at this moment that the cycle closes. You stop seeking stormy romances and start desiring stable relationships. You stop wanting someone who will pick you up off the ground and start looking for someone with whom you can put down roots. This is the most beautiful moment in the process, when you realize that true love doesn't have to be loud, it has to be real. It doesn't have to scream, it has to accept. It doesn't have to prove anything, it just needs to be felt, with a calm body, an open heart, and a peaceful mind. And if you're listening to this now and thinking, it's not too late for me, the answer is obvious. Yes, because it doesn't matter how much time has passed. True love isn't measured by age, but by readiness. And if you're preparing, it's already on the way. The question remains, how to embody all these reflections in life, how to turn theory into a lifestyle, how to remember these lessons in everyday life, how to recognize the signs, control impulses, choose with greater awareness and less need. That's what we will explore now, practically, consciously, and deeply, step by step, to apply everything Jung has taught us, not only to attract the love meant for you, but to keep it when it finally comes. Because the truth is that love blooms only in fertile soil, and that soil begins within you. You've reached this point, and that in itself is already an act of courage. In a world that insistently distracts us from ourselves, stopping to reflect on love, unconscious patterns, and how we interact with others is a quiet gesture of resistance and hope. Because while many people continue to live on autopilot, seeking in others what they lack inside, you've decided to first look within yourself, You've decided to break the cycle. Doubt. Feel. Ask yourself, am I really ready for a love that transforms, not just distracts? The answer to this question doesn't depend on time or circumstances. It depends on the internal willingness to take the path that Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, free from masks, traumas, and projections. It's in this place that true love can appear, not as salvation, but as a mirror, as a meeting of whole personalities. But it's not enough to understand this with the mind. It's necessary to descend into the body, into the soul, into everyday gestures. And that's why now, at this moment, we will together build a strategic plan for practical application with simple but deeply transformative steps so that you can assimilate and live everything we've talked about so far. Allow yourself. Breathe. Choose this path with awareness, because it can change not only how you love, but also who you become when you love. First, start with inner silence. Dedicate at least 5 minutes each day to be in silence with yourself, without music, without a phone, without distractions. Only you, your breath, and what surfaces. That moment is a portal. It's the place where the subconscious begins to speak. And as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Silence is where consciousness is born. 2. Observe your patterns with compassion. List your past relationships or infatuations, not with guilt, but with the eyes of a student. Ask yourself, what did they have in common? What part of me did each one activate or wound? What patterns am I repeating? And most importantly, why am I repeating them? The goal here is not to judge yourself. It's to recognize yourself. The pattern dissolves only when it's seen as it is. 3. Develop self-acceptance before seeking acceptance from others. In each of us there's a wounded child, and often we seek in others what we cannot give ourselves. Create space for emotional self-care. This could be a letter written to yourself, a ritual of self-soothing, a long bath, or an internal dialogue. The main thing is to learn to be a refuge for yourself before expecting someone else to shelter you. 4. Practice actively listening to yourself. When you meet someone new, instead of asking yourself, do they like me? Replace that question with, how do I feel near this person? Your body knows this before your mind does. Observe your behavior. Are you trying too hard to please? Are you ignoring red flags? Are you romanticizing absence? Active listening is the antidote to emotional blindness. 5. Strengthen healthy boundaries. Love isn't the absence of boundaries. On the contrary, conscious love flourishes where there is respect for oneself and for the other. Practice saying no without feeling guilty. Practice silence when your heart asks for a break. Don't give up yourself to be accepted. You've done that your whole life. Now it's time to do it differently. 6. Study your archetypes and follow the concepts of the anima and animus. Ask yourself, what unconscious image of the feminine or masculine do I carry within myself? Where did it come from? From whom? From what pain?